When David Stockman was budget director back in 1985, the national debt was approaching $2 trillion, which caused some alarm. Today, it's approaching $22 trillion, which means we are once again pressing up against the congressionally imposed limit on government borrowing. We welcome now David Stockman, President Reagan's budget director, over $16 trillion. No, that's not over $16 trillion, but I'd like it if you did have that much money. He's the author of Peak Trump, The Undrainable Swamp, and The Fantasy of MAGA. And he's also former investment banker and corporate executive. He's coming back to Bloomberg for today's conversation in chief. So welcome, David. Good to have you.
Well, it's obvious the swamp has not been drained because when we took office in January 1981, the debt was actually under $1 trillion. And the first thing, to his great regret, that Ronald Reagan had to do was ask Congress for an increase in the debt ceiling above $1 trillion. He unfortunately was never able to slow down the growth of the debt because the tax cut got too big, defense got out of control. But that's where it all started. Remember, in 1980, that $1 trillion was 30% of GDP. It had taken a long time to get to that $1 trillion mark. In fact, 38 presidents before him. Here we are today, $22 trillion, and it's actually objectively, this is the important thing, built in $40 trillion. By the end of this 10-year cycle, unless we do something to change fundamental policy, tax and spending and defense and entitlements, we'll be at $40 trillion, 140% of GDP. You can't really live with that when the baby boom's retiring and they're all going on Social Security.
Well, which raises the question, does it really matter? I mean, we were in a panic. We went to $2 trillion. Now we're at $22 trillion. The country didn't fall apart. We now have people with modern monetary theory saying it doesn't matter. And by the way, they're from the left and the right saying, you know what, as long as we're the globe's currency, we can borrow as much as we want.
That's ridiculous. That's utterly ridiculous, because if that were true, why bother with $22 trillion of debt? Let's have $50 trillion, $100 trillion. Let's dump money out of the sky from helicopters and tell everybody to have a party. Who needs to work? Just have the government or the Fed print the money. That's crazy as hell. And we've reached the point where we are today on the debt because the Fed has accommodated the Congress over and over with these easy policies that have made it possible to finance the debt at artificially low interest rates. But, you know, we have $400 trillion, we had $4.5 trillion balance sheet at the Fed, $22 trillion worldwide. It's the central banks that have enabled the politicians to pretend that there's free lunches, that fiscal doesn't matter, and that the debt can keep growing. Well, you know, it's not sustainable.